Welcome everyone to Bonifabcustom. My name's Rob and I'm going to be showing you today how to repair a Ducati gas tank. Now this gas tank is from a Street Fighter, and a lot of the newer Ducatis like Panigales and Street Fighters will have these aluminum tanks, and if they're in an accident they really can get mangled. Now the tank we're working on is pretty bad. It has two giant dings in it, or real bad dents in it, and we're going to try to get those out as best as possible, and I'll show you just how I do that. Let's take a look at the tank. So you can see the tank is pretty bad. Now let's take a look at the tools that I'm going to be using. Now you could use variations of these tools. These are the ones that I use usually. You're going to need some sort of soft surface to get that main dent out. Now I use a sandbag. Basically it's filled with a sand, and it's made out of leather so I can pound into it. And that's going to really help when I want to reform or push the majority of that dent out. And I just basically have it on a piece of wood or something else that I can really hit it with. Next thing you're going to need is this here is a Temp Stick. Now what this does is, this one here is rated for 600 degrees. Now when you're doing an aluminum tank, you don't want to exceed the temperature, especially get close to the melting point of that aluminum. It's very hard to see when you get to that temperature, but these make it very easy. And what it is basically like a wax that melts at 600 degrees. So you'll see me with the torch heat up the surface or that area and start touching it with these Temp Stick, or a wax strip that is rated for 600 degrees. Now I use 600 because it's aluminum, and that I find the best way to bring it up to like an annealing. Every time you hit or try to bend out a metal, it starts to harden, or it work hardens. So especially with aluminum, every once in a while you have to heat up the area to that temperature and let it cool down slowly, and I find that it's easier to form it after I do that. So the Temp Stick. Then you definitely need a torch, and I recommend a smaller torch, not a big huge torch. This you could get at your local hardware store, and you can localize the temperature because it has a smaller output of the flame. Next, I also have some wood punches. So this is just a handle made out of hickory, and I rounded the end so I can hit it from the inside. I have a couple of punches that are made out of aluminum, like this one here. It's a little smaller, localized. This is just a rod, aluminum, and then a bigger piece of aluminum to really get it blended a little bit easier, or to blend a bigger area. And I use this. This is just a bar of aluminum. And then any sort of way of hitting it with a hammer, a ball peen. I have a ball peen hammer that I use for it. So let's start heating up the area, and I'm going to start pushing out that main dent. I'm going to get it out as far as possible on my sandbag, and then after I do that, I'm going to go over to my anvil. You're going to need an anvil or a hard surface to really get to get that bend flat, because once we bend it out with our sandbag, it's still going to be rippled on top, and we need to kind of bend it out so it's flat compared to flat with the other surfaces of the tank. So let's start bending out that main dent. Now just a quick note, this tank, I cut out a square in the back of the tank so I was able to hammer it from the back. If a tank has small little dents, you can come around through the inside from the gas fill. You might be able to push a little dent out, but whenever you're dealing with a tank that has major dents on it, you're going to have to cut out the back of the tank or a piece of the back of the tank and re-weld it after you're done. That's the only way you're going to really get that formed properly, and so it looks really nice. So I don't show the cutting of the back, but you'll see me pushing it from that hole that I made in the back. Let's get into it. So now that I have the majority of the dent out with my sandbag, I'm going to go over to my anvil, and with the harder punches, I'm going to try and flatten out those ripples. I want to get them as close to flat as possible. And the anvil is going to let me do that because it has a hard surface now. It's not going to balloon out that dent anymore like it would on the sandbag. So I'm going to push onto it and get it as flat as possible. So let's do that. So now that I got the ripples out on the anvil, I'm going to take my 80 grit sandpaper and start sanding any last variation of that dent on top of it. Now this tank in particular is finished with an 80 grit, so it's going to make it perfect to really blend in that dent. Let's do it. So we have it all sanded up with our 80 grit. It looks pretty good. Now keep in mind, it's not going to be perfect. This was a terrible tank, and realistically, this tank would have just been garbage. Now that it's usable, you could still see, especially on the side here, a little bit of a, variation in here. Now this part here was a little bit more difficult to do because of the overfill tube that's inside this tank. If it was on the left-hand side, it would have been a lot easier to actually get it really nice. But again, I didn't want to cut that overfill tube. It would be overflow tube. It would be really hard to put that back together. Now, last thing I need to do is, now that I have everything done, is to weld on that back plate that I cut out to fix this tank. So let me weld that around and we're done. Okay, so I got the weld on there. Doesn't look the prettiest, but it's very thin material, so you have to be very careful when you're welding that in the back, or if you get someone to weld that professionally, just to make sure there's no leaks either. Now that it's all done, it's ready to put some stickers on, and we're going to clear coat it and send it off to the customer. Thanks for watching Bonifabcustom. Hope you enjoyed this video on fixing this aluminum tank, a Ducati tank. Don't forget to subscribe and push that button for notifications for more videos like this one. Thanks.